use it. So it's in such a beautiful room, and I've never seen such a nice room filled with so many rascals in my life, I don't think. Just to echo, I think what Dee had said, I would like to thank the organisers for this, not only for inviting myself to come and talk a bit about one of the cases that has been through a couple of times, but they actually raise this, and as Clare said, there's very little awareness about what is going on in these situations, and just gatherings like this are invaluable. As small as people may think they are, they're invaluable to put in a hot flag for us. I'll just to contextualise Stephen's case, I'll just maybe touch on a couple of things around it as well. And I think internment, as most people conceive it, and as Dee mentioned at the start, for most people it's probably bound up in images from like 1971 to 75, black and white images of people being snatched from their homes, torn from their communities, ripped from their families. It's typically how I think most people would conceive of internment. Internment, however, has featured on this island for generations. Both the British State Forces and the Free State Forces, maybe to steal a phrase of George Galloway's, two cheeks of the same arse, interned Irish Republicans without trial in varying quantities at differing times throughout our history. Internment without trial was largely abandoned by the British in 1975 due to opposition within Ireland, but also due to international condemnation of the denial of human rights that it afforded the DAs. So internment was gone, finished and done away with. Indeed, at a recent demonstration in support of Stephen Murney, a middle-aged woman approached one of our number and genuinely asked, "Is internment not over? My father was interned in the 70s and I was pretty sure they were all released." And the woman wasn't being facetious at all, she was being absolutely genuine in her question. And all she had done is she had fallen victim to what many other people have fallen victim to, is they just missed the subtlety of the British state and what it was doing. Internment without trial was gone, largely done away with. But what it left in its wake was more insidious. For almost 4 decades, the British state has exercised a punitive system of internment against political opponents, and this is generally known as internment by remand. Under this process, persons are arrested, detained, and questioned in the Special Interrogation Centre in Antrim. The persons are charged and remanded in custody in Maghaberry, where they're brutalised for extended periods of time, and in a number of cases have lasted as long as 3 years. Political opponents and key activists, often on trumped up and spurious charges, are removed from the streets for protracted periods of time, only to be released 1 year, 18 months, maybe 2 years later, when it's found that the charges against them cannot be substantiated in any way. The judicial, prosecution, policing and political systems in the 6 counties all willingly collude in this process. To understand the true horrors of the system, I think it helps to put more of a human face on it and to examine real cases which affect real people. And I'm mindful that the person who I'm going to talk about is not only a comrade and friend of mine, but I'm mindful that his father's here as well. And I believe I have about 10 minutes, and I intend to try to fill every one of those minutes to try to do some justice to Stephen, his case, and the impact it's had on his family. Stephen Murney is a member of IRGI, which is an open, legal, and transparent party, and it's registered as such in both the 6 and 26 counties. He was arrested by the PSNI and arraigned his home in November 2012. As a PR owned spokesperson for IRGI, Stephen documented, photographed, and recorded numerous instances of stops and searches, house raids, along with many other examples of heavy-handed and sinister operations being conducted by the PSNI and MI5 in the general Newry area. He regularly highlighted these alongside many other socio-economic issues through the press, the party website, and through various social media outlets. Indeed, just prior to his arrest in November 2012, a letter penned by Stephen was published in a local newspaper. And a scathing appraisal, he condemned what had been a series of early morning dawn raids by the PSNI on homes in his native Derrybeg estate. And he expressed serious concern over the impact that these aggressive dawn raids were having upon the families targeted, particularly the children, and maintained that the raids were excessive, unnecessary, and entirely avoidable. Stephen couldn't have known that less than 24 hours after the ink had dried on that paper, that a similar fate and scenes frighteningly reminiscent of what he had criticised were due to befall him and his own family. So less than 24 hours after the letter appeared in print, the front door of Stephen's home was smashed in, and in stormed the PSNI reading party. During this invasion, the PSNI seized a computer, political literature, banned uniforms, and toy guns belonging to Stephen's sons. He was arrested, he was stolen away from his young, traumatised family, brought to the Antrim Interrogation Centre, and 3 days later, he was charged and brought to court in Newry. The 3 charges which the PSNI laid against Stephen were: 1. Collecting information which may be of use to terrorists, distributing information which may be of use to terrorists, and possessing items which can be used for terrorist purposes. Due to limits on time, and I mean this sincerely, it would be impossible for me to cover the true ludicrousness of the charges, the dishonesty of the PSNI personnel, and the vindictiveness of the courts. But what I'll do is just try to give you some flavour of what Stephen was subjected to, and the arbitrary way in which people like Stephen are stripped of their liberty. In support of the charge, collecting information likely to be useful to terrorists, the PSNI cited a large number of photographs of their officers that they had allegedly recovered from Stephen's laptop. The vast bulk of the images in question weren't actually created by Stephen, but were instead downloaded from the internet. Many of these images date back as far as the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Anyone who's used a search engine to research any of the events over the last 40 years in occupied Ireland is likely to find that their computer too contains large numbers of images which are now deemed to be of use to terrorists. In charging Stephen with distributing information likely to be of use to terrorists, the PSNI cited his use of Facebook and other internet platforms to post images of police. These photographs were taken of PSNI officers in public and on duty at political protests, commemorations and so forth. Legal and human rights organisations routinely advise political activists to document police behaviour and harassment. In essence, the PSNI are now alleging that anyone who uses the internet to post images of them is now distributing information likely to be useful to terrorists. It's worth noting that during one court appearance, the PSNI and the prosecution team were particularly exposed to ridicule. During a particularly painful and wholly incorrect explanation as to how Facebook actually operates, which ironically is a key feature of their case, a member of the prosecution's phone started to ring loudly in court. I think it was a 1980s power ballad. If I remember correctly, I think it was actually The Power of Love. Belted out and filled the court, confirming that not only was his choice of career crap, but his taste in music was rather crap too. Admonished by the judge, they were told that it was evident that he knew as little about mobile phone technology as he did about social media forums. In line with the level of competence on show, it's probably unsurprising that the insult was lost on him. In support of the charge of possessing articles likely to be useful to terrorists, the PSNI cited 2 BB guns, berets, trousers and jumpers recovered from Stephen's home. BB guns are legal, widely available across Ireland and belong to Stephen's son. The beret, trousers and jumpers are all part of a uniform of a drum and flute band of which Stephen was previously a member. When photographs were produced of Stephen wearing the said uniform, playing in Easter commemorations some years previous, the prosecution were left all at sea. They hadn't expected that this actually was a band uniform. And they were left quibbling with the judge over shades and hues of green. Is this the same green as that? And the rest of it. Such items are now deemed to be of use to terrorists. It can be expected that thousands of Irish citizens will soon be charged just like Stephen Murray. In February 2013, the PSNI removed Stephen from McGavry and brought him back to the Antrim Interrogation Centre for further questioning. As an aside, and when Stephen was recounting the episode, Stephen said as they made their way along the motorway, he became aware of flanks of armoured Land Rovers and PSNI cars and motorcycle outriders sealing off all entrances and exits to the motorway. And in sort of Stephen's casual style, for those who know him, he was saying, "Oh Jesus, must be somebody really important coming here today. What's this operation about?" He said it wasn't until he realised that they couldn't outrun the operation, that it was following the whole way, that he realised it was for him. This was to transfer him from Antrim to McGavry. And then you start thinking, like, what is the smoking gun that Stephen was facing in Antrim? It must have been something very serious that mounted this type of operation. And the following day, the British state levelled additional charges against Stephen in a move widely seen as an attempt to bolster what is widely acknowledged to be a very weak case. The new charges included aiding and abetting in criminal damage to property owned by persons unknown, relating to the possession of a number of stencils that had allegedly been used to spray paint political slogans in Newry, and that was what required this massive operation. Through the various hearings, the judge in the case was actually highly critical of the case that was being brought against Stephen, and I will say he reluctantly granted bail, but any raised hopes of the were quickly dashed when he made his reappearance into the court, because he inexplicably imposed a raft of draconian conditions, which includes some of these. There are more, but this is a selection, give you a flavour. A ban on Stephen living with his partner and child in their home in Newry. A ban on Stephen entering the city of Newry for any purpose, including visits to his doctor, family or friends. A ban on Stephen using mobile phones, cameras, computers or any other electronic emitting devices. A ban on Stephen attending any meetings or other events of a political nature. A requirement that Stephen reside at a specified address at least 5 miles from Newry. A strict curfew that requires Stephen to remain within the specified address between the hours of 7 p.m. and 10 a.m. A requirement that Stephen wear an electronic tagging device at all times, and a requirement that Stephen sign bail daily at Newton Hamilton PSNI barracks. Having imposed the conditions, the judge remarkably turned to the PSNI and the prosecution and asked them, was there anything else they could think of? Was there any other conditions that he could impose on Stephen? It was such really oppressive nature of the conditions that between them they couldn't muster a single additional condition. As a demonstration of the vindictiveness of the court, when dealing with the possibility of an emergency situation where Stephen would have to attend the hospital in Newry, which would be closest to him, it was stated that he could do so providing that he informed the PSNI in advance. Bear in mind, this is an emergency situation, so if he's going for an emergency situation, he has to tell the PSNI in advance of him going there, and if the court were to discover that he'd used a mobile phone to alert them, that he would find himself back in prison. Following a consultation with his legal team and his family, Stephen rejected the conditions to which the court had imposed. Stephen has consistently contended that he is totally innocent of all charges levelled against him, and he's not prepared to permit either himself or his family to be further humiliated or persecuted by either the PSNI or the courts. The conditions meant that he would only have minimal contact with his wife and children, and a force for him to live elsewhere was solely designed to penalise his family. In effect, Stephen was to become his own jailer. And this, folks, is what internment by remand actually looks like in a real life situation with real people. This is how Stephen Murney was stripped of his liberty for 10 months and counting. This is how Stephen Murney's family was robbed of a husband, a son, a brother. It's widely believed in political and legal circles that the PSNI are using Stephen Murney's case as a test case to effectively lower the bar for cases being brought against political opponents. If the state succeeds in convicting Stephen on the basis of the evidence outlined above, it will set a legal precedent which will have deep and far-reaching implications for activists across the political spectrum in Ireland, Britain and beyond. It would be extremely naive that a precedent established against an Irish Republican today would not be used against a socialist, an anarchist, a trade unionist, environmentalist, a whistleblower, or other political opponent tomorrow. All who claim to stand against injustice and for human rights are duty bound to support Stephen Murney and the campaign to have him released. Internment is not gone, it's not finished, it's not done away with. But I believe that collectively, through all our efforts, through the Anti-Internment League, for example, that has been established in Belfast, of which I was proud to take part, and meetings like this in Dublin, and hopefully forging new links, that we can indeed make this a thing of history. Thanks very much.